Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx and to who is now or later watching this video. We have the pleasure to welcome you today for a special event featuring the launch of the report of the United Nations Environment Management Group on the UN system response to marine litter and plastic pollution. This event is a special collaboration with two series of events in the run-up to the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. The first series, the UN Environment Management Group has partnered with is our Geneva Big Plastic Pollution Dialogues, which have kept the international community in Geneva engaged on this topic in the past months, making links with numerous processes in international Geneva and beyond. Many of the leading experts we have with us today have engaged throughout our journey. These dialogues are organized by the Geneva Environment Network in collaboration with the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention Secretariat, the Center for International Environmental Law, the Global Governance Center at the Graduate Institute, IUCN, Norway, Switzerland, and the Forum on Trade, Environment, and SDGs. The other series of events we are partnering with today is the warm-up to the UN Environmental Assembly, convened by GRID-Arendal, looking at learning and exchanging on the scope of a global agreement on plastic pollution. Before we go into depth on the topic we are addressing today, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as a video of the event will be made available on the webpage of this event. The link will be shared in the chat. Throughout the event, you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box. The moderator will use your questions to feed the discussion after the presentations. Today, your guide and moderator will be Caroline Dearverk, Director of the Forum on Trade, Environment and Sustainable Development Goals, known as TESS. Before I hand over to Caroline, we would like to welcome the opening remarks by Norway and Rwanda. It is therefore our pleasure to turn to Her Excellency Ambassador Tine March-Smith for Norway's opening remarks. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, colleagues and friends. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this joint event of the two ongoing meeting series that Norway is co-hosting to bring attention to challenges and solutions related to the global plastic crisis. Norway has the presidency of the 5th Environmental Assembly, which will be held later this year. There, we will work to adopt a mandate for negotiating a global agreement on plastic pollution to guide our common actions, targeting the whole life cycle of plastic products. Because plastics is not plastics. Effective measures across the life cycle of plastics means that we need to identify measures ranging from production and design of plastic products so that they can be repaired, reused, and recycled, to environmentally sound plastic waste management, awareness raising, and capacity building. The challenges and the solutions are different in all corners of the world, but we believe that the commitment in a new agreement should be the same for all. We also think that the UN system has a lot to offer to support our common priority of addressing plastic pollution across the entire life cycle of plastics. The report, which is launched today, highlights exactly this, and also the benefits of synergies and system-wide cooperation across the UN. Interagency cooperation is key when addressing a complex and systemic issue like marine litter and plastic pollution. Preventing and reducing plastic pollution is on the top of Norway's environmental agenda. Since 2014, Norway has pushed for stronger global commitment to address marine plastic litter and plastic pollution, with a new global agreement as the most effective solution. As we have participants from the WTO with us here today, I am pleased that Norway also participates in the initiative in the WTO addressing plastic pollution, and we believe this initiative can contribute positively to the UN process. I look very much forward to hearing more about the EMG report and also listening to the great lineup of speakers on the involvement of the UN here today. I really believe that we can build on these experiences as we prepare for negotiations of a new global agreement on plastic pollution. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Excellency. It is now my pleasure to turn to Juliette Cabera, the Director General of the Rwanda Environment Management Authority, for her opening remarks. Juliette, over to you.
Thank you so much for the floor. Good afternoon. It's a good afternoon from Kigali, Rwanda. Distinguished guests, friends of the environment. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon for this session of the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution, for preparing a report on the UN response to marine litter and plastic pollution that we are launching today. The report is an important contribution to the efforts to beat plastic pollution and details the many institutions that have joined this worthy cause. It also provides practical recommendations for scaling up and increasing the impact of this work. Today, I'm pleased to share some of Rwanda's experience and perspectives in addressing plastic waste in our communities and ecosystems. For more than 2 decades, Rwanda has prioritized environmental protection and conservation. This focus on sustainable development and ensuring a healthy environment for all people living in Rwanda led the country to take a meaningful action on plastic pollution. In 2004, Rwanda banned plastic bags as well as specific types of plastic packaging. This was done following an assessment that showed negative impacts these materials were having on human health and on our environment. Since then, we have also banned single-use plastics and are now transitioning to sustainable alternatives. This experience has taught us the importance of national, regional, and indeed international collaboration to beat plastic pollution. And there are 3 main lessons from Rwanda's journey that I would like to share with you. Firstly, there is a need to increase awareness and understanding of dangers of plastic pollution, as well as the solutions and technologies that can fast-track the transition to environmentally friendly alternatives. We also need to foster behavior change in our communities by investing in grassroots initiatives, empowering change makers and demonstrating a clear health and economic benefits. Finally, we need to put in place a robust legal and policy framework or frameworks at both the national and the global levels. Because plastic pollution is a transboundary issue, we can only solve it by working together. That is why Rwanda actively participated in the ad hoc open-ended expert group on marine litter and microplastics, which was established by UNEA4. The group's report identified the main barriers to combating marine plastic litter and suggested a number of options to take at a national, regional, and global level. Following robust conversations over the recent months, we are pleased with the process that has been made towards an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. The draft resolution, co-sponsored by Rwanda and Peru, recognizes the transboundary nature of the issue of plastic pollution and the need to tackle it at source. It also makes the strong point that circularity is needed to have any chance of building a sustainable and regenerative global economy in the coming decades. We hope all countries will agree to take the next practical and ambitious steps of negotiating the global treaty, which will be a useful tool to face the issue.
I guess that we have lost Juliette. We might later reconnect her. Caroline, I think we can give you the floor to to announce our speakers today and moderate this event. Very honored to have you on board, Caroline. Please go ahead.
So thank you very much, Diana, for the introduction, and welcome again, everyone, to this session. My name is Caroline Dearverk. I'm the director of the Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDGs here in Geneva, which is a partnership of UNEP and the Graduate Institute. So we're really delighted at TESS to be part of this Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogue series. So I just wanted to start by congratulating the Geneva Environment Network and Diana for playing such a critical role in connecting the dots between the many issues and dimensions of the plastic pollution crisis and also the many stakeholders who are relevant through this ongoing series of dialogues. I think on a topic that is as urgent, complex, and multidimensional as the plastics crisis, dialogues like this are really vital to strengthening the engagement and momentum needed for international cooperation. So our two speakers this morning have already clearly reminded us of the scale and the urgency of the plastic pollution challenge. And I think I can speak on behalf of many of us present today by thanking each of their governments and them individually for their leadership on this topic. Making progress requires that we have dedicated champions from a diversity of governments and stakeholders, and it's really fantastic to see countries as diverse as Norway and Rwanda providing such consistent leadership. Now, both speakers have highlighted that they're not alone. They've underlined the commitment of a growing group of governments, more than 100, to pursuing a new global agreement on plastic pollution, and in particular, their efforts to launch negotiations on an agreement at the UN Environment Assembly this year. They've also highlighted the critical role that the UN system has in supporting efforts of members to tackle plastic pollution and to the many ways in which governments need and benefit from the support of international organizations. So here I would underline too that stakeholders from research, community, civil society, and the business sector also have a strong interest in greater UN system-wide coordination, and indeed have much to bring to the table in this respect. So critically, stakeholders have been especially vocal on driving analysis of the plastic pollution crisis, helping us all to understand that addressing it will require a life cycle approach and a systems change approach. The latest scientific and economic research highlights that we will need to use all available levers to transform the plastic sector and to tackle plastic pollution, both upstream and downstream, from production through to consumption and waste management and reuse. And we'll need to better connect the dots between different dimensions of and solutions to the plastics crisis. So in order to achieve that, we need the UN system and the wider family of international organizations to work more collaboratively and help members and stakeholders connect the dots. So it's this challenge that we're turning to today. And as noted by Ambassador Moore-Smith, the starting point for our session is the launch today of an excellent new report by the UN Environment Management Group entitled Addressing Marine Litter and Microplastics, UN System-Wide Contributions. And for those who haven't had a chance to view it, a link to the report is being provided by our hosts in the chat. So as a reminder, the Environment Management Group is a UN system-wide coordination body on the environment. In its own words, it provides a forum for knowledge exchange and promoting system-wide policy coherence, synergy, and collaborative and flexible approaches to environment issues in the UN system. So having had a chance to review the EMG report, I recommend it as an excellent example of exactly the kind of work that is needed to underpin and serve efforts at coordination across the UN system. So in this part of today's session, we'll hear views from our excellent panel of speakers from across the UN and other international organizations on the EMG's new report. We've also invited speakers to share their perspectives on the role of the UN system in supporting countries' efforts in the context of ongoing UNEA deliberations on a global agreement, and also their views on the prospects and priorities for more cooperation. So to set the scene for the discussion, I've been asked to make a few brief remarks to introduce the report itself. Now, this kind of report, in my view, is exciting and useful, not only because of the content, but because it can help to generate and spur dialogue and critical reflection, such as we're going to have today, on how we can do better, act faster, and deliver more meaningful reductions in plastic pollution. The millions of people around the world, we should not forget, from scientists to civil society groups working on the ground, major international NGOs, businesses and governments working to tackle the plastics crisis, really want and are calling for action from the UN system to exercise leadership, maximize their combined effectiveness, and support their efforts on the ground. So in this respect, the framing of the report is really notable. This is my first observation, which is that the report highlights not only the scale of the plastic pollution problem in terms of the marine environment, but it also links this to wider pollution challenges, noting that it has dire consequences for human health, the global economy, biodiversity, and climate. The report addresses the complexity of the climate plastic crisis and its interlinkages with other challenges. Drawing on the guidance of UNEA's ad hoc expert group on plastic pollution, it recognises that we must consider impacts and opportunities at each stage of the life cycle of plastics. And the report also examines UN activities from sea to source. But it goes further to consider UN activities related to harmful and toxic chemicals, for example, to plastic pollution in soil and in the air, including the carbon footprint of plastics. And it also considers issues such as labour, human rights and development considerations. So in sum, the report is broad in its thematic scope. And second, the report provides an overview and analysis of how the various parts of the UN system are involved in tackling plastic pollution. It reveals that more than 40 UN entities have expertise across a range of disciplines to support member states in their efforts to reduce marine litter and plastic pollution. Many agencies are involved in raising international awareness, providing technical assistance, gathering evidence, providing analytical studies, and also supporting practical activities on the ground. The report covers UN activities in the field of health, human rights, environmental justice, gender impacts, as well as trade and development dimensions, urban environment and infrastructure, and so on. So the point is that the report provides really extensive data on what agencies in the UN system and other international organizations that observers of the EMG are doing in this space. So by providing a state of play on what's going on, it provides a really important foundation for further and more integrated interagency cooperation. One of the things the report does not do, and indeed was not asked to do, was to analyse the range of intergovernmental activities underway beyond the UN system, including at the regional level. It also didn't aim to capture the vast range of stakeholder efforts across the world and how their work can drive, strengthen, and support UN system cooperation. So I think that's surely an area for strengthened work in the future. But as I noted, it wasn't the scope here, but just to note that wider agenda was not part of this current report. Finally, the report makes a set of really useful recommendations for promoting collaborative and coordinated actions through the UN system. It shows opportunities for synergies, collaboration, and joint programmatic activities going forward. So if we see this new report as a first step towards expanding UN system-wide coordination, I'm really delighted this afternoon to support a next step by inviting our 6 panelists, all leaders from within their respective UN agencies and international organizations, to reflect on the report's recommendations and to provide us their recommendations on opportunities for taking this agenda forward. So we have with us this afternoon Mr. Roel Pfleger, who is Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. He'll be followed by Jean-Marie Palgam, who is a Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. We then have Dr. Marcos Oriana, who is the Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Then we have Dr. Susan Gardner, who is the Director of Ecosystems Division at UNEP, followed by Eduardo Mansur, who is a Director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment at the Food and Agriculture Organization. And finally, we have Mr. Raphael Tutz, who is the Director of the Global Solution Division at UN Habitat. So as I mentioned earlier, the report itself covers some 40 international organizations. And so this panel discussion today represents a subset of those engaged on this topic. There are a number of others mentioned in the report, from the WHO to UNCTAD, the Global Environment Facility, UN Industrial Development Organization, and the UN's Regional Economic Commission. So there's definitely a broader discussion to be had, but I think today we have really a critical mass of some key organizations. So let us get started. So each of our panelists will have 7 minutes to speak. And I'd like to first invite Roel Pfleger from the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions to provide his views. Now, Rolf has been leading BRS since 2014. He was formerly the Minister for Environment and Energy in the Seychelles and has an extensive experience in the UN and international system, working on issues from the Montreal Protocol to the Climate Change Convention. So Rolf, a question just to open the floor to you is, in your role as Executive Secretary of the 3 conventions, how do you see the role of the UN in supporting countries with existing legal instruments, such as the recent Basel plastic waste amendments and a possible future agreement on plastics? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and very nice to see you all, albeit in a virtual environment. And of course, thank my colleagues at the EMG for this very important report, which was indeed a matter that was discussed in the last EMG meeting, which we also held online. As you know, in my role as the Executive Secretary of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, we play a very instrumental role in advancing multilateral environment agreements. And one important outcome of this work is to ensure that we achieve those global goals through those agreements, which then translate into national legislation, standards, guides, capacity building, which enables countries then to meet those global goals. And as you know, the Basel Convention adopted the plastic waste amendments in 2019. Working with countries and parties to implement the amendments on the plastic waste. Now, specifically, the amendments cover Annexes 2, 8, and 9 of the Basel Convention, for those of you who are hearing this for the first time. So it is for this reason that we are supporting, of course, the development of a global plastic treaty that builds upon and complements the Basel Convention and any other existing international, regional agreements, as well as national initiatives that will help us to reverse this tide on plastics, not only in the oceans, but also as shown by a recent FAO report on land, in the soil, and of course, impacts on wildlife and humans as well. Now, before I get to the crisis, it needs to engage with stakeholders, and this is something that we've been engaged in since we've been given the mandate on the issue of plastics, in engaging in particular with industry, but also with other civil society organizations, noting that there's a lot of also community-led and community-based initiatives happening across the world in the countries that we serve. Now, in supporting all these institutions and also engaging the private sector in exploring solutions that also engage consumers and other organizations, we are developing guidance, tools, and even programs that we are implementing in different countries, together with the other UN agencies, but also with other non-UN agencies. One of the first things I would mention in terms of the role that UN can play is to test first innovative approaches, but also to see what works on the ground, because dealing with the subject of solid waste management is very complex each country have their own particularities and peculiarities, and even set of laws and capacities. So it's important that we fits all approach, but really work with the countries to ensure that they can implement what is best according to their special. This is the right approach for us to work with them. Obviously, it is very important that we have high-level support, high-level political support, and the UN does have the platform and the methods in which we can engage at the highest level. And I think this is very important in terms of the UN's role in advancing advocacy, regional coalitions, engagements, targets, ambitions. These are all the things that the UN can engage in, and there's many examples where we've been doing these over. And even so we have the UN has a lot of experience in engaging, and I think and by having a lot of high-level meetings like this one and other high-level dialogue forums, intervening in the regional environmental meetings of ministers in Africa, in Asia, and in South America, I think we can easily push the needle as we engage politicians at the highest level. And of course, we have not been doing this work in isolation. And here, first, I want to thank the donors, in particular, Canada, the Norwegian Agency for Development, and others for their support in helping us to do this work. And of course, we've not been doing, as I said before, this work in isolation. We've been working closely with the FAO, with the World Trade Organization, and very happy to have them here with us. The UNEP Ecosystem Division, also Suzanne is with us. And of course, with other unlikely partners at the World Union and the OECD, and also regional organizations that are regional centers, and the regional seas agreements. So there's a lot of coordination that's happening, but this concerted action that we need to have, I think, is happening, and we just need to ensure that we keep all stakeholders on board, we engage with them, and we also measure the effectiveness of all these actions on the ground in terms of whether all our work is actually I've been talking to a number of initiatives that's happening around the world, actually going around and actually picking up the litter, but also measuring the amount of littering that they are picking up in the oceans. But I think we should also focus on data management so that eventually we can measure the effectiveness of those actions that we are doing. I will stop here, and hopefully, probably I will have some more things to say based upon questions that colleagues will ask. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rolf. I really appreciated the point that you closed on, which is about the importance of measuring the effectiveness of the work that is underway and managing for accountability so that we assure that we're actually making an impact on the ground with all of these efforts. One of the other points I think it's important to underline was your recognition that this work all requires financial support. And whether that's for international organizations or for national governments, and indeed also for stakeholders that are working on the ground and civil society groups that are doing a lot of the basic work that's driving this issue forward. And finally, you also mentioned the importance of high-level political leadership and momentum to drive the work forward. So thank you very much, and also for highlighting the very specific ways in which the Basel Convention is already cooperating with other organizations in the UN system. And it's great to see how clearly you see the complementarity of that work. So I'm going to move now to our second speaker, who is Marcos Oriana, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the implications for human rights of the environmentally sound management and disposal of hazardous substances and waste. It's quite a job title, but he's the UN Special Rapporteur at the Office for the High Commissioner of Human Rights. Now, in your role as Special Rapporteur, your recent report on the global plastics crisis reveals how every stage of the plastics life cycle has adverse effects on the full enjoyment of human rights. You highlight in particular the human rights challenges arising from the use of toxic chemical additives in plastics. So from a human rights perspective, and in light of the recent Human Rights Council resolution recognizing access to a healthy and sustainable environment as a universal right, what do you see, Marcos, as some of the key challenges posed by plastic pollution, and where do you see a need for strengthened cooperation?
Thank you very much, Carolyn, for your introduction and also for that question. I also wish to thank the Geneva Environment Network for the invitation to join the panel. And before sharing a couple observations on the specific question you asked, Carolyn, I wish to welcome the UN Environment Management Group's report on the UN responses to the plastics crisis for two reasons. These are rather straightforward, but the first one is that the plastics crisis involves various fields of knowledge. Carolyn, you mentioned the report's framing and how it integrates various dimensions, including industrial design, international trade, biodiversity, human rights. There's no doubt that effective responses to the global plastics crisis call for the integration of various domains of knowledge that are implicated in this problem. And so that's the first reason that I would wish to highlight to welcome the report. And the second one is also pretty straightforward, is that the report can no doubt help further strengthen UN coordination by UN programs, by UN agencies that are working on plastics. This can help implement the various options that have been identified by the ad hoc open-ended expert group on marine plastic litter and microplastics, so-called AHEG. And that includes action at the national level and, of course, a new global instrument that's legally binding and that addresses plastics in its life cycle. I wish to, with those two preliminary points, make three observations on your question, Carolyn, and more broadly on the EMG report, and this from a rights-based perspective. And the first one is that the plastics problem is not just about waste. As Ambassador Tina Morch rightly points out in her opening remarks, addressing plastics involves a life cycle approach. It involves a circular economy. The report goes at lengths in framing its analysis in this light. It highlights the need to tackle production and consumption patterns. It highlights how addressing the plastics problem, calls for tackling upstream and downstream, raising visibility, but I wish to stress the upstream dimensions of the problem. I think it's important to go a step beyond, which is echoing what you mentioned, Carolyn, that in my report on plastics and human rights that I presented to the UN General Assembly last October, I analyze and document how each stage of the plastics cycle has negative adverse impacts on human health and the environment and on the enjoyment on human rights. This includes extraction of the raw materials that are used to make plastics. It includes the emissions and that impacts on fence line communities that live in the neighborhood of production facilities. It includes the transport of plastic products that sometimes often end up in the sea. It includes the exposure of users, consumers, to additives in plastics, and of course, waste that has received the most visibility. But again, it is not just a waste problem. One example here is exposure to the toxic additives that are added to plastics. Endocrine disrupting chemicals added to plastic have a disproportionate impact on children who are stolen from their childhood, they are forced to grow up more quickly than would otherwise be the case. So this is the first observation that I would make, that the plastic problem is not just about waste, but it needs to tackle, solutions need to tackle each stage of the plastic cycle. A second observation that I would make is on the magnitude of the plastics problem globally. The report documents, provides evidence on how annual global production, and I'm quoting here, of plastics is approaching 350 million tons. Now, these figures are staggering. They are increasing. So again, the plastics problem cannot be addressed simply as a waste management issue. It needs to be tackled in its life cycle, in its circularity, and in every stage of the plastic cycle. And then this brings the question of whether incremental changes or tweaks in the margins can do the trick, or whether a change in paradigm is needed. And this is where, as you mentioned, Carolyn, the Human Rights Council in its last session in October, for the first time, recognized a global, universally right to a healthy environment for everyone. And this right, of course, contains various elements. The right to a toxic-free environment is one of them. And guided by this recognition, I would advocate and make the point that plastics may be critical to society in certain uses only, but not in the ubiquitous uses that are currently littering the seas and littering society. And so could there be an approach that identifies essential and critical uses and that begins to change the paradigm so that the plastics problem can be addressed at root? And the third observation, also cognizant of time, is the need for a global instrument. The report presents compelling evidence on this. As Juliette Cabrera mentioned also in the opening remarks, the need for coordination, transboundary dimensions of the problem. I would also wish to highlight the global environmental dimensions of the plastics crisis. Marine litter affecting coastal communities, bioaccumulation, long-range transport of persistent organic pollutants that are added to plastics, the funding and spread of false and misleading solutions. So often we see dumping of plastics, open burning, but the touting of further recycling, even though current technologies and capacities are unable to deal with the volumes, and also they generate all other forms of toxic concentration, incineration, and the creation of persistent organic pollutants, dioxins, etc. On the global environmental dimensions of the problem, I also wish to highlight the trade, international trade in short-lived plastic products. So products that very quickly turn into waste and then burden the importing countries, many of which are in the global south and unable to adequately manage the resulting waste. And finally, trade in waste containing plastic. Roel Pfleger mentioned the important amendments of the Basel Convention. At the same time, e-waste trade remains rampant, and there's a significant plastic component to that. There's ongoing work that hopefully will bear fruit in addressing that problem. So to conclude very quickly, again, to congratulate the UN Environment Management Group for this initiative, the UN Task Team on Marine Litter and Microplastics. In a way, the report brings all hands on deck from the UN to address the multifaceted plastics crisis. And I also wish to highlight in concluding how the report presents compelling evidence that further supports the adoption of a UNEA resolution to kickstart negotiations of a global and legally binding instrument on plastics that incorporates a rights-based approach. Thank you, Carolyn. Happy to take any questions and comments.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marcos, for those remarks. I'm going to save the questions until the end until we've had all of the speakers. But I really wanted to thank you for underlining this point that that the plastic pollution problem is not just about waste. You've really eloquently outlined the many health impacts and environmental justice aspects that are present from upstream to downstream. And I also think this emphasis on the wider challenge of rethinking the consumption and production of plastics is something that we all recognize has to be grappled with going forward. And here I think it's really important to underline, as you have, that at the moment we're really headed in entirely the wrong direction. Both production and investment in further production capacity for plastics is expanding. And there are indeed many misleading solutions that have been tabled. There are also many, very compelling solutions as well, but we do need to be mindful of the credibility of the solutions that are out there. And just before turning to our next speaker, I did think it's important to underline that addressing these upstream solutions is really one that's going to require a lot more attention to the challenges of economic transformation. So just as in the case of the climate crisis, we all understand now that a shift to greater sustainability will require massive economic transformation. There will also be winners and losers. There are major commercial interests at stake in the plastic sector, especially those invested in the fossil fuel industry and the petrochemical industry. And there's also employment at stake in many countries. So a key challenge is how can governments act to regulate and incentivize change? And how do we do so in ways that are fair and that shift us in the right direction? So with that in mind, I think it's a good transition to our intervention from Jean-Marie Paugam, who is the Deputy Director General at the World Trade Organization. Now, the EMG report suggests that there's room to enhance collaboration, not only within the UN system, but with other actors in the international system, and particularly those with certain thematic expertise or specializations, such as trade and the circular economy. So the question for Jean-Marie is, how do you see the role of the WTO in this? And where do you see the potential for enhanced collaboration, especially in light of the recent WTO ministerial statement on plastic pollution and environmentally sustainable plastics trade? So Jean-Marie, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year's to all. I want to thank the Geneva Environment Network for its invitation, but above all for keeping the flame of this Geneva beating pollution dialogues that has been ongoing, if I'm not mistaken, since 1 year or a couple of years already. It's very important, so we're supportive. We do welcome the very good report of the EMG, of course, sharing broadly its finding, very interesting mapping of the complementarity of different actors and players of the system, and we share most of the recommendations. I'll come back to some of them. I'd like to just start by reminding you or presenting rapidly where we are at the WTO on plastics and what we think we could do to help the collective endeavor to fight plastic pollution. So where we are is we are witnessing an acceleration of the involvement of the WTO on the issue. The first discussions on plastic date back from even the creation of the organization. There were some technical debates we started there, but it's really since 2 or 3 years that some of our members have really accelerated and started expressing interest in discussing plastic pollution, and they launched what we call IDP here, which is an informal dialogue on plastics. This was the start of it back in 2019. Now, this dialogue unfolding has clearly established two things. The first one is that plastic pollution is a high-profile trade issue. I think it was alluded to by the previous speaker. We have some figures from UNCTAD and the Graduate Institute, which were released recently, which estimated the volume of identifiable trade flows of plastic to more than 1 trillion a year, or something which could represent 5% of global trade in 2018. Trade in plastic waste only represented about $3 billion last year. So that's the first element. It's a real trade issue. The second one, it's a federating issues for our members. Several of our members came together voluntarily, spontaneously, from north, south, east, and west, from small island economies to large developed and developing countries to try to tackle this issue. And therefore, last month, end of December, 67 of our members elevated this dialogue to the level of a ministerial statement, so which was setting a roadmap in support of global efforts to reduce plastic pollution. So we really have a political commitment of a very significant number of our members, and last month's declaration was a very important milestone. So what is it that we can do to help? And I want first to insist on the notion of helping, because it's crystal clear for us that the WTO is not the place where a global strategy against plastic pollution will be elaborated. This place, of course, is likely to be UNEA, and we are just here to support by designing and implementing a trade component. And this message of complementarity, which is also the message of the report, one of the messages of the report, was clearly was stated out loud and clear last year when we had welcome at the WTO a preparatory session of the next UNEA 5 session in cooperation with UNEP. So some of our members were afraid at one point of the risk of duplications of efforts. We do believe that the complementarity is there, and this risk of duplication is being controlled. Of course, I insist on this because this is one part of the recommendations that I was referring to before in the report. One of them has to do with if I understand correctly, strengthening the mechanism of interagency information sharing and cooperation. And obviously, we would like to be part of that if and when it is being structured. This being said, it's also very important to identify where the value added of the WTO could lie and what is it that we can do in terms of complementarity with other agencies. And in essence, there are four things that we can think of. The first one has already started. It's about transparency and intelligence sharing. Our members are committed to improving data collections regarding trade flows and supply chain. And this is very important because just on data, on trade data collection, we have quite significant difficulties. Much of the data we rely on today does not cover hidden flows of trade in plastics, flows which are embedded in products, but not identifiables in custom data. And the real volume and value of trade in plastic could be up to 30% higher than what the figures shows. The second element is that our members are notifying to us the trade measures related to plastics that they take. And it's a very, very important and interesting and valuable source of information that we can share. For instance, if we dig into our database on such notification, we can confirm one point which was made by Mr. Oriana before. It's not just about waste, but still 80% of the measures which are being notified to us concern the downstream part of the plastic life cycle. So there is a little bit of a gap, or maybe not enough interest in the upstream part, namely the one which applies to primary plastics or plastic-based inputs. So this is the kind of thing that we can provide under this intelligence and transparency producing. Second item is regulatory cooperation. The WTO strongly encourages our members to base their measures on international standards to facilitate trade. Here we look very much at the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, and others, which might be instrumental in helping our members to fluidify and facilitate trade in a way which will be fighting plastic pollution. So we could inform and further cooperate with such institutions in developing standards and best practices on plastic management. And regulatory cooperation is also a way, this is one point I think in the report, to ensure good alignment between domestic policies on plastic and international, that is for us, trade policies on the same. Third is clearly technical assistance. While our 67 members are committed to sustainable plastic trade, we need to make sure that no one is being left behind. We have a very, very important interest from LDCs in these plastic issues, and actually LDCs are amongst the members which notified trade measures. They need technical assistance on recycling, standardization, and sustainable alternatives. And here is one area where the partnership with the UN system would be strategic for us. We could join forces to bring the technology and innovation and the capacity building and training capacities to LDCs and other developing countries. Fourth and last, of course, this is the traditional and probably the more salient function of the WTO, is rulemaking. We are not there yet in our initiative on plastic pollution dialogue. There is no rulemaking thinking at the moment, but of course, at one point, this might become one element of the contribution that the WTO could provide to a broader initiatives on plastics. There are areas which are already being discussed through our members. For instance, one of them could be liberalization of products which are alternative to plastics. There are also issues of coherence between domestic bans. If you ban single-use plastic on your domestic market, for instance, why would you export it? Can we put that into coherence? These are matters for discussions, but we are not yet at the stage where there would be initiatives in rulemaking. Of course, the impetus which will be possibly coming from other areas of the UN system and UNE could also be important to us in that regard. So these are briefly the areas where we can contribute. We are, of course, willing to contribute. Count on us. We have our members very, very much mobilized on this issue and watching it. So I look forward to continuing the discussion with you. Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jean-Marie, for that wonderful overview and also for reminding us of the scale of international trade in plastics. And I thought your remarks sung nicely with those from Marcos, who also underlined that what we need to examine is not only the important challenges related to trade in plastic waste, but also trade in products that become waste, and often, particularly in developing countries that have even more limited capacity to manage that waste in an environmentally sound fashion. A key factoid that I put out there is that 60% of primary plastics are traded internationally. And we know that we don't yet know enough about the full scale of plastic that crosses borders. It's not only in a vast range of products that we can easily identify as plastic, but there are many hundreds and thousands of products on the market that have plastics as one of their components. And also we know that many products that cross borders are packaged in plastics as well. So all of this is an interesting part of the wider international landscape of how we're going to tackle the plastic sector. In Jean-Marie's remarks, he mentioned UNCTAD a number of times, and I think it's important to note that both UNCTAD and the International Trade Center were also mentioned in the study. One of the organizations that's also relevant in this space is the World Customs Organization, which of course is responsible for classifying products traded internationally, which is key to producing some of these statistics and so on that we need. In the case of UNCTAD, they've recently received a new mandate to address the discharge of plastic litter and other waste in oceans, and to significantly reduce marine pollution of all kinds through their work. And one of the areas that they're particularly leading in is on this question of the opportunities for developing countries in the production and export of substitutes to plastics. So thank you again, Jean-Marie. I need to move on swiftly now to UNEP. And of course, UNEP has just a vast array of work underway on different aspects of the plastic pollution crisis. And particularly, Susan, in your work, you've been working on linking efforts to support issues such as sustainable freshwater systems to efforts to bolster sustainable marine ecosystems more widely. You have work underway onto chemicals and climate at UNEP. So it would be great to hear from you about how we could become better at making linkages and strengthening collaboration on work on plastic pollution across the life cycle. Susan, you have the floor.
Well, thanks, Caroline, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a few comments on the really rich conversation so far from the previous panelists and speakers. As Marco said earlier, it's really clear that we need an all hands on deck approach across the UN system. And that a common vision is really essential to ensure that those efforts are unified. So I see these dialogues as being really valuable in helping to advance that global conversation. Now, the report identified, as others have said already and pointed out, that at this moment, the interventions have been predominantly focused on downstream impacts. So sea-based sources of marine litter or plastic at the end of its life cycle. And there is a risk that the problem of marine litter and plastic pollution could be perceived as an ocean issue, or at least certainly that was a concern in the past. This report really underlines that we need to further enhance linkages between downstream and upstream life of plastics. And we can do this by enhancing information sharing, enhancing collaboration, visibility, and adopting a more comprehensive system-wide vision from source to sea. So we have to really rethink how we make, use, and dispose of plastics, taking into account that full life cycle. And this, as Marco says, requires that all hands on deck approach from the whole UN system, but also from the whole of governments, from civil society and private sector. A combination of response options is urgently needed at the national, regional, as well as the international level to be addressing this as a transboundary issue. And because there's so many sectors involved, it has such a cross-cutting character, there is truly a role for UN entities to work across the whole system to tackle these issues. The next UN Environment Assembly really presents a global opportunity and a really significant moment in time. So many countries have come forward already to endorse a ministerial statement calling for a decision at UNEA 5.2 later this year. And we're so appreciative to the leadership of Rwanda and other countries that have really begun to lead the way in terms of the vision for negotiating a global agreement or to begin those negotiations of a global agreement at UNEA. And there appears to be general recognition among member states of the importance of a broad approach to plastic pollution, including the full life cycle of plastic. So that's a very good position to be starting from now. And we stand ready at UNEP to support member states, providing science-based information and facilitating discussions that promote ambitious action on marine litter and plastic pollution. But to get more specifically back to your question, there are a few essential components to strengthening linkages and collaboration across that full life cycle. And I would say first, we need to significantly reduce the production of virgin plastics, particularly single-use plastic products. And we can't do this without the full engagement of industry and finance. There's just 20 companies that produce half of all single-use plastic products that are thrown away. And the plastic production is set to expand by about 30% over the next 5 years. So this is also going to be increasing carbon emissions while it creates more waste. If these companies lean in on solutions and really come to the table, we can make amazingly rapid progress to truly reduce virgin plastic production. In addition, there's collaborative projects that UNEP has done, for example, with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment that demonstrates how you can involve all actors in the plastic value chain in approaches that are transparent, that have agreed indicators to really shift the needle on consumption of virgin plastics. Now, synergies across the UN system in working with private sector on these early stages of product design, on manufacturing, on production, these can be really meaningful in terms of supporting industry transitions, including emphasizing safe and sustainable design as an important element in circular economy for plastics and reducing single-use plastics. I would say, secondly, we have to recognize and value the benefits of action. A comprehensive circular economy could reduce the global volume of plastics entering our oceans by 80% over just the next 20 years. And it could reduce virgin plastic production by 55%, which would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25%. That's enormous. And there's a really strong economic incentive for action as well, because transitioning to circular economy can reduce the cost to governments by about $70 billion between now and 2040. It can create about 700,000 additional jobs, and a lot of those would be in the global south. Thirdly, while we're closing the tap upstream, we have to continue to invest in effective waste management systems. So while maybe that's the focus now, we can't lose sight on the work that still needs to be done there. Improving solid waste management across the globe will make a huge difference in the amount of plastic pollution and with significant effects on human health. Finally, I'd like to say that collaboration across the life cycle should also be a fundamental aspect of national action. And as nations begin to consider the way forward on a global instrument, near-term action on plans at the national level, it remain really critical to ensuring that we continue progress. And this means proceeding with legislation on waste, production, public procurement, and information that's available to consumers. It means interacting, engaging with actions on plastics across the whole economy through physical measures. So that could include product content, manufacturing, trade, as Jean-Marie was talking about earlier, transport, waste management, a whole number of things. It could also mean continuing with and building up national source inventories, capacity building, and promoting campaigns that engage citizens in solving this challenge and being a part of the solution. UNEP will continue to be there to support governments for those who request help in developing their national action plans. We've been piloting some new approaches in the design of these plans with an integrated effort that enables comprehensive and evidence-based approaches, included the concept of the full life cycle of plastics, including the whole concept of source to sea, and having analysis of legal frameworks that can strengthen that science policy interface. Of course, we also recognize that it's really important to connect all work related to indicators on other indicators, such as SDGs, other international agreed framework, that's very important in terms of having an efficient approach. I would just say, in summary, the report talks about and makes such a strong case for the holistic approach. We need to increase efforts to reduce the material production upstream while we continue to improve waste management downstream. This report reveals that national and local presence of UN entities so far is far from utilized, so there's great promise there. Right now, there's tremendous support from member states for an INC process on a global agreement, and the Secretary General has specifically identified the need to unite efforts across the UN system, as well as with external stakeholders, on really capturing solutions to the challenges that are posed by plastic pollution. for more long-term, programmatic, strategic approaches that are anchored in a truly system-wide vision. And these are needed across the whole challenge, to broadly across the entire challenge. We know that if we get it right on plastic pollution, that we're not only going to clean up our seas, we're going to help solve the triple planetary crisis. We protect our air, we protect our land, and we protect our water. And we can protect our climate and our health at the same time that we're protecting the health of the whole planet. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susan, for such a comprehensive view from UNEP on the scope of the plastic pollution challenge, for your emphasis on the upstream dimensions and at the same time the need for ongoing and strengthened work also downstream on this area. I really appreciated your focus on the opportunities for more collaboration and the concrete gains that could be made, both through voluntary action and through more concerted regulatory and policy action on the part of governments. It was really great to hear you talk about finance, which has not been mentioned much today, but I know that UNEP's finance initiative has been working on this topic, and also the ways in which the finance sector through insurance and investment decisions can also help to shift the plastics economy, along with retailers and brands, the role that they can play in helping to shift away from some of that unnecessary use of problematic and harmful and short-lived plastics. So really great also to have your concrete ideas on activities that are needed going forward. Diana has just reminded me in the chat that the topic of the following session of the Geneva Environment, the Beat Plastic Pollutions Dialogue, will indeed be on finance and its role, both in terms of financing cooperation, but also financing a transition in the plastic sector. So I'm going to turn now to our colleagues from UN Habitat, and I'm delighted to welcome Rafael Tatz, who is the Director of the Global Solution Division. So Rafael, from the perspective of UN Habitat and the work that you do to reduce waste in cities and improve urban infrastructure for waste management, what do you think the UN system could do more and better, and who should be involved? Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and thanks to the Environmental Management Group for this, I think, good question, and also for the opportunity for UN Habitat to speak in this panel, and greetings from Nairobi. So UN Habitat has been engaging on this topic with cities on the broader topic of solid waste management for more than 2 decades, promoting the importance of actually integrated approach to sustainable waste management for both public and environmental health. However, the uncollected and mismanaged solid waste is remaining one of the biggest challenges, and it's the major source of marine litter. Cities and local governments are actually responsible for improving their waste management system, but they often lack the resources, the capacities, and also the necessary baseline data for proper policy intervention and infrastructure investment. So to address this last point about data, we have launched last year the Waste-Wise Cities tool, and that's a rapid assessment tool for cities' municipal solid waste management performance. And this tool uses SDG indicator 11.6.1 as a monitoring device. It is measuring the percentage of municipal solid waste that is collected and managed in a controlled facility in the city. So this tool enables cities to obtain essential data for sustainable waste management planning, as well as getting to know their recovery value chain, as well as the environmental control level of their waste management facilities. And since the launch of this tool, UN Habitat has applied it in more than 30 cities with various partners, such as UNEP, GIZ, JICA, ISWA, etc. And the findings from the data collected so far suggest that slums and informal settlements are the major source of marine litter, since they often lack access to waste collection service. So if we take the example of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, for instance, which is situated directly at the Indian Ocean, where we applied the tool in 2021, almost 6,000 tons of municipal solid waste are generated there daily. And only 36% of that is collected, and less than 5% is managed in controlled facilities. We can all imagine where a large part of that waste ends up in Lagos, in the ocean, obviously, in Dar es Salaam. And also in Lagos, we found that 18 kilograms per person per year of plastic is leaking into the water systems, which is equivalent to 2 PET bottles thrown in the ocean by every single person in Lagos per day. So the report for us is very relevant, as it highlights that UN systems should make more efforts for data, indicator and monitoring of marine litter and plastic pollution. So UN Habitat in its own way can offer one part of the solution in the stage of waste management in cities. And city level waste data is an essential building block in the entire plastic life cycle for monitoring the progress of our joint efforts to reduce marine litter. SDG indicator 11.6.1 can provide ample primary data on the ground, which can also facilitate tangible actions at the city level. So my key message is to all of you is to invite everyone, especially the UN system agencies, but also everyone else who is here on this call, to use the Waste-Wise Cities tool as a standard methodology, and this will facilitate collaborative action and thus help us close the existing solid waste data gap in cities around the world. Thanks so much, and over to you, Caroline.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Raphael, for that summary of your excellent work and the areas in which there could be collaboration. As time is running somewhat short, I'm going to shift directly now to our colleagues from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, where we have with us today, we've had a change of speaker. And the new speaker, now I've just lost my notes, is Mr. Lev Neritin, who is the lead on the environment workstream at FAO. And so, Lev, we're aware that FAO has been addressing the use of plastics in the agricultural sector and has released new issues on this report in the recent months, highlighting the urgency for coordinated and decisive action to combat plastic pollution linked to the agriculture sector. So I'd be really pleased to hear your thoughts on what could drive transformation in a coordinated way and where the FAO sees its role in coordinating with others in this space. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon to colleagues. It's really a pleasure to be here. So unfortunately, I would like to convey regrets from the Director of Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment. Unfortunately, IT prevented him to be with us today, but he's sending his warm regards. And I think, first of all, as all my colleagues, I would like to really express appreciation and strong support to the UN-EMG report on marine litter and plastic pollution, and especially acknowledge that I think it's a first ever report, really showing the solidarity and basically the best overview of various and diversity of activities and measures undertaken by the UN system. And this is just before I go into more details on agriculture, because I think, again, I share very much key messages from my colleagues, and I definitely would like to start from the statement that all hands on deck, circular economy, source to sea approach. We have to think a lot about sources, but also do not forget about integrated waste resources management. So basically, I think that solving this issue will be impossible, in particular to support our member states without a concerted and systematic response from the UN system at large. And I think this report provides the first step towards that. Since plastic films have been introduced in 1960s, as in many sectors, in agri-food sector, plastic use become an integral part of systems we're dealing with at FAO. And even the term was introduced in agriculture, a plastic culture. Plastic is adaptable, as we all know, it's a low-cost material, and it became omnipresent in every steps of food systems, from production to consumption and retail. As Karin, you mentioned, we recently, literally 1 month ago, released a report, Assessment of Agricultural Plastics and Their Sustainability, a call for action, which estimated that in 2019, agricultural value chains used 12.5 million tons of plastic products, and 3 times of this amount were used in addition in food packaging. Of 12.5 million, the most use is primarily in crop production and livestock sectors, which account for almost 10 million tons, which are followed by fisheries and aquaculture with 2.5 million tons, followed by forestry, 0.2 million tons. Plastics, as we all know, is also a major source of contamination for natural ecosystems. I think previous speakers covered a lot of these issues, and especially the problem of microplastics and nanoplastics. Then, as soon as they're in the environment, there is no way to get rid of them. As the demand for agricultural plastics continues to grow, and there is an urgent need to better monitor quantities of plastics products that are used and leak in the environment. Again, I support several messages of my colleagues. So monitoring and assessment is crucial. And it's crucial also for different agricultural subsectors I just mentioned above. The EMG report concludes that still much more work is needed to ensure that plastic is retained in the economy as long as possible, and also it has the highest economic value. Therefore, in this case, promoting circular approaches which start from design and move towards consumption is so critical. Specifically, some examples of solutions in the agri-food sector, in our case, is adopting agricultural plastic practices which avoid use of plastics. For example, using cover crops, using, for example, thick plastic mulch films that can be easily removed from the field, using biodegradable alternatives, and using recyclable boxes for example, transporting fish and aquaculture products. But clearly, similar as the message for packaging, first and foremost, and the most important measure would be to design alternatives and trying to reduce use of plastics in agri-food sector. The FAO report provides irrefutable evidence to support action towards a better management of plastics, including management on end-of-life cycle. And we also provided a number of recommendations how to fill still significant knowledge gaps. Tackling agricultural plastic pollution is the crucial measure in helping to deliver objectives of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which was launched last year by FAO and UNEP. This work is also central to our mandate, specifically the environmental dimension of FAO mandate, and corresponds to our new strategic framework for the next decade. Specifically, it also links to a priority program area at FAO on bioeconomy for sustainable food and agriculture. And as also a few colleagues mentioned, the tangible results in this area will tangibly contribute to a range of sustainable development goals, specifically SDG 12 on responsible consumption production. I would like to also inform participants that at our front, we're also taking measures. And this year, one of the FAO statutory bodies, the Committee on Agriculture, at its 28th session in July 2022, will discuss the issue of agricultural plastics, not only addressing specific knowledge gaps, but also to look into specific policy response, which our organization and how we can support our member states. We support the need, as I mentioned before, for UN system approach to scale up collaboration and coordination to combating marine litter and plastic pollution, including microplastics. We also will continue working, it's a more traditional area of FAO, on sea-based sources of marine litter, especially on abandoned, lost, on otherwise discarded fishing gear. We will be strengthening implementation of FAO voluntary guidelines for marking fishing gear, and also continue implementing Glow Litter partnership together with International Maritime Organization. So we still continue collaboration with GIZAMP working group on sea-based sources of marine litter, and overall looking forward to strengthening our engagement with the members of UN Environmental Management Group. As a specialized agency of the UN, leading international efforts to achieve food security for all, ensuring a regular access to high quality food, to lead active and healthy lives, we aim to continue playing an important role dealing with the issue of agricultural plastics holistically, especially in the context of circular economy, as well as bioeconomy, using them as a guiding frameworks for our action. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that summary of the work you're doing and the really impressive efforts that are underway at the FAO to connect the work to efforts underway in other agencies. I think that what we have heard today is this really impressive sort of like-minded, actually, more than I expected among the various UN agencies. We've heard repeated mention of similar priorities, concepts, and ways of working that really highlight the potential for agencies to, on the one hand, focus on their respective areas of expertise, but also to bear in mind, the wider, bigger picture of what the other pieces of the puzzle and levers that need to be used are. So unfortunately, we're running somewhat behind time, so we're not going to do the Q&A live. However, the hosts have assured me that the questions that have been posted will be responded to online. So we will try and get answers to those from the relevant speakers. So I think what I'd like to do now is offer a very quick summary before turning the floor back to my colleagues from the UN-EMG. I think that what we've really seen today is a joint desire to work on shared priorities, and also some very strong hints of what is needed in order to do that. We've heard about the need for targets, for stronger work within member states, also to build coherence among their own ministries and approaches to the question of plastic pollution. We've heard the need for more monitoring and measurement, for more capacity building, for deeper analysis, for pursuing a range of different policy solutions. We've also heard a focus on the importance of engaging with stakeholders from business and from the civil society sector in order to ramp up impact and also to learn about what is actually effective on the ground. So at the outset of this panel, I underlined a critical role that the EMG has played in drawing together this report and indeed supporting this dialogue among agencies today. So looking forward, I think it's clear that we need the EMG and UNEP to continue to play an important role as a forum where this collaboration can be continued and coordinated, strengthened and deepened. Many speakers today, I think, would agree on the need for leadership on coordination. So I'd also commend Jen's role, the Geneva Environment Network's role today in enabling this conversation. I think it's clear today, we've heard that there's a role for many different UN agencies with their various areas of expertise. We've also heard from speakers a clear sense that action is urgent and that we have a strong, we have a great opportunity at hand this year at the UN Environment Assembly. So the forthcoming negotiations or discussions on plastic pollution at UNEA can really help us bring about a common agenda that can help unite all of these actors and actions, including those of the UN system. One of our speakers, Susan, also noted today that the UN Secretary General himself is very much an advocate of system-wide coordination on the issue of plastic pollution, and also of making sure we harness the role of the range of stakeholders that will be vital to helping us transform towards a plastic pollution-free planet. So I think with those remarks, I would like to thank all of our speakers for their excellent interventions and turn now to Hussein Fadey from the UN Environment Management Group to provide closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I hope that you can hear me, see me
Yes.
well. Great. Thank you so much to you, Caroline, for moderating this event, and also thanks to all of the panelists. I just wanted to come in from the EMG Secretariat side to thank all of you, thank the Geneva Environment Network, the government of Norway for its contribution from the start of this process that led to the preparation. And also some of the individuals who have been behind this report, my colleagues, Tricia Bennett, and also Yannick Pitkanen, who have been supporting this process from the very beginning. So words of thanks to all of them. And also to all of the UN agencies, some of which have been in this panel. They have been supporting this process throughout. This is the result of the UN agencies, more than 40. So we're really thankful to all of them. I just wanted to bring some elements here to show that the fact that this is not just one-off product, that this process has started as a result of a call from member states to the UN system. And now we would like to present the results to the UN-EA 5.2 to be guided on the next steps. So we hope that with this report, we have provided a good mapping of UN system expertise and relevance to the addressing plastic pollution and microplastics. And hopefully we would then take the next steps forward with the guidance that we again will receive from member states. As Rolf said, in the last meeting of the EMG heads of agencies in October last year, heads of agencies agreed to build on this process to create and launch a much more comprehensive process on addressing the pollution at large, building on what UNEA has already constructed, all of us, on the implementation plan on a pollution-free planet. So we hope to bring that mandate, that call, to the agenda of the UN system again, and try to see how the UN system actually is responding to the pollution at land, water, air, as well as the chemicals, waste, and other cross-cutting areas. And what needs to be done to synergize the efforts and hopefully produce a common approach to pollution agenda in the next 2-3 years, hopefully. The Secretary General also recently has called upon us to immediately provide a common approach on plastic pollution in particular within the next 6 months. So we have also this mandate to focus on plastic pollution in the next 6 months. as I said, and then build on that, preparing a much wider process of pollution in the UN system for the next 2-3 years. I would like also to say that the report has given us certain recommendations also to follow on. In that regard, a task team of the EMG will continue its work on the implementation of the recommendations. We will try to ensure that there will be common messages, common narratives being communicated to UN as well as the other stakeholders, linking not only the environmental elements of the pollution, but also the poverty, the equity and equality agendas to the plastic pollution. And I think this is what the EMG is striving to do, to bring these multiple agendas that are all trying to achieve the SDGs together. We would like also to integrate and implement this agenda within the UN system operation and management itself, for the UN to lead by example and to implement this agenda as an example, and also promote that by practicing what it preaches for the world. As a result of this report, we could also help preparing maybe a reporting mechanism within the UN system on pollution that would allow agencies to regularly give us feedback on how they have integrated these things into their programming, into their support to countries, but also in integrating that within their own system of management and operation. So again, the last word that this will continue. We will keep you and member states informed about the work that the UN system will be doing on this topic, and we hope to benefit again from the perspective of the member states who have attended this call to be able to ensure that this agenda is coherent with the member states' agenda. With that word, I would like to thank you again, and thank you the Geneva Environment Network for hosting and supporting this event, and sort of throwing back to you, Caroline, or to other colleagues like to speak after. Over.
Thank you. I just taking the floor to thank you, all the panelists today, to thank our moderator, Caroline, to thank you, the attendees that are still with us. So we are ending this event 5 minutes late. Thank you, the UN Environment Management Group team, especially, of course, Hossein, but Janika, who helped us prepare this event, for partnering with us and with GRID-Arendal for the launch of this important report. And just to remind you that we will continue to discuss plastic in the wrap-up to the second part of the 5th session of the UN Environmental Assembly, which dates which was initially, which should take place at the end of February, but we are still discussing if it might move to April. And so just to remind you that next week, indeed, as it was mentioned by Caroline, we will discuss finance and plastics at the session we are hosting on Tuesday. That the Geneva Cities Hub is hosting a session on plastics at the end of January. That is also going to be interesting. That is also co-hosted with our colleagues of UN Habitat. And that we will have a last session also in preparation of the UN Environmental Assembly on what is needed for a global instrument on plastic pollution that will take place on 1st of February. A few other events are also in preparation, so stay tuned to on our website and social networks to learn more about our activities. As mentioned in the beginning of this event, the summary of the event, it was asked again in the chat. The video of the event, as well as the documents that were presented, or the links that were shared in the chat, will be made available on the webpage of the event, and the link has been shared many times. We will send it again to the participants to this event. Maybe another important discussion for those who are interested in the pollution agenda is that tomorrow we have an important event on the 8th replenishment of the GEF Trust Fund, with the CEO of the GEF himself, and some of the heads of the chemicals and waste cluster, where we will discuss how pollution is addressed in the negotiations on this 8th replenishment of the GEF Trust Fund. So for those who are interested in that agenda, I hope to see you tomorrow. The event starts at 1 p.m. Geneva time. And with that, once more again, thank you very much to everybody who has been involved, also the little hands that you haven't seen that made this event possible today. And to all of you who are really interested in this topic. Thank you very much.